Hello again and welcome back to the Music Roundup. I've decided on a different angle this week. Last week I talked about one particular piece of music. This week I'm going to talk about a different sort of service. So for quite a lot of these Music Roundups I've spoken about the normal Sunday Eucharist we do and the sort of music that I might have put down if we'd still been meeting. This week I've decided to talk about an Evensong service instead. We do Evensong at St Saviour's perhaps 4 times a year. It's a great occasion, first Sunday of the month every 3 months or so, and I've been part of it a couple of times in my tenure at St Saviour's so far and always enjoyed it. It used to be a much bigger part of my life, especially when I was organ scholar at King's, Cambridge, and had to play for Evensong 4 or 5 times a week. So I've got through quite a lot of the standard repertoire from doing that. Now, the service of Evensong was invented for the Anglican Church by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer in 1549 when he created the 1549 Book of Common Prayer. So he was Archbishop of Canterbury during the end of the reign of Henry VIII, the whole short reign of Edward VI and a bit of Queen Mary. And what he did to create this new evening prayer service, which could be sung as Evensong, was to combine various properties of the 2 main Catholic evening services, Vespers and Compline. And those 2 services each have a canticle. The Vespers service has a Magnificat and the Compline has Nunc Dimittis, and they get paired up in Evensong. As a result, over time, many composers in this country wrote pairs of canticles called evening services, which would be a Magnificat and Nunc Dimittis. There's settings by Bird or other contemporaries of his in the period just after Cranmer's Common Prayer Book. And then much later, end of the 19th century, lots of what we call Victoriana composers, many of which stretched into the early 20th century through Charles Villiers-Stanford, who I spoke about in an earlier video, and then later on Herbert Howells, and then many contemporary composers are writing evening canticles these days. But there's a new fashion these days, which is to create sets of evening services by using the Magnificats and Nunc Dimittises that were written as individual pieces in other traditions. So there are many Magnificats from the great Renaissance Catholic composers which don't have a Nunc Dimittis to pair with them and are written in Latin rather than English. So you can take Victoria, Palestrina, and their contemporaries and have beautiful Renaissance Magnificats, and then find a Nunc Dimittis by perhaps Lassus or someone else from that particular tradition. Now I've chosen an angle for this imaginary Evensong where there's an independent Magnificat by one composer and a Nunc Dimittis by another, which are drawn from 2 completely different traditions. Now, one is by an English composer, Giles Swain, Cambridge-based, and the Swain Magnificat is famous because of the style of the music that's drawn from West African musical traditions. In 1981, Giles Swain spent 2 months in southern Senegal and the Gambia, and he listened to the Jola people and made recordings of their traditional music. And there's one particular piece which is called the O Lulum, which is a work song that he heard them singing. He recorded and the recordings are now stored in the British Library. And that musical line was then integrated into a Latin Magnificat that contains lots of polyrhythms. That's to say that the parts don't sing at the same time. They sing more, to put it simply, they sing in one another's gaps. So there's a lot of crisscross of rhythms, and into that is integrated this traditional music from Senegal and the Gambia. So 2 completely disconnected traditions crashing together in one short and pretty amazing piece. It stretches into a good 12 different vocal parts at certain points. It's really challenging, really effective and exciting, and a very popular piece of music. So I'm going to put a link up to that now. It's 1982 Swain Magnificat written for the choir of Christ Church, Oxford, and since they first performed it, it's become very widely performed and recorded, and it can really put a bit of a bang into your Evensong. So that's still an English composer, but I'm now going to move to a Russian composer, Sergei Rachmaninoff, who is very famous for a lot of instrumental music. There's his piece The Bells, there's the various piano concertos, of which the second and third are very famous pieces of music. But he also wrote some pretty amazing choral music. In 1915, he wrote his All-Night Vigil, which took him about 2 weeks to write. It's a piece of many different movements and sections for a cappella choir, very much in the Russian style. And it was a huge hit when it was first performed in 1915. And it was so popular and successful at the first performance that they performed it 5 more times in the same month, just so that everyone could have a chance to hear it. Now, there was bad luck after it, because in 1917 the Russian Revolution hit, and the new Soviet Union had anti-religious policies, which meant that the nature of these choirs totally changed. And so the choir that first performed it was disbanded and turned into the state academic Russian choir, which sounds rather different in character. So the Soviet Union, not known for having sympathies with religion really, so a piece of religious music, even as great as this, didn't survive very well through that era. And it was thought that it's been described as representing the end of an era. No piece of music represents the end of an era quite as well as this, which is a very sad and solemn description of a piece of music. But I think you might hear why people think it has that sort of undertone, at least. Now, what's famous about this Nunc Dimittis, which is taken out of this vigil, so it's from a completely different liturgy, but it's the same words that we have in the Nunc Dimittis in Evensong, albeit in the language of Church Slavonic rather than English, is at the very end, the basses go down to an absurdly low note. Now, on a piano, that may not sound particularly low, it sounds obviously quite low, but for a voice, if we go an octave up, that's... From the way I'm singing that, you can probably see that it's quite low for me, and I'm sort of a bass. It's beyond my range. Now, a lot of English singers can make a career by reaching those notes because it's pretty rare. And it's also possible, if you drink quite a lot of whiskey, let's say, and wake up with a hangover or a cold, to reach those notes as well. But in the great tradition of Russian choral singing, they have people who are able to reach those notes sober, and they are called octavists. So it's a special sort of basso profundo, as in a very, very low bass, who has really trained to sing these ridiculously low notes. And when Rachmaninoff first presented this piece to the conductor of the first performance, that conductor is apparently said to have asked, "Where on earth do we find these basses? They are as rare as asparagus at Christmas," which was a bit of a weird remark, obviously, but apparently that was what came to mind. But Rachmaninoff knew the singing tradition of his country, and he knew that they would be able to find basses who could reach those notes, and indeed they did. So it's a great challenge for basses who think they are worth their salt in the very, very low regions, and there are plenty now in this country who can really belt it out, so that's cool. Finally, I've taken a piece of German music by Rheinberger, and very early on in this series of videos I talked about Rheinberger's Mass, and I'm going to talk about a piece that I think encapsulates the spirit of Evensong perfectly, despite having nothing to do with the tradition of Evensong. And that's his Abendlied of 1855. So Abendlied literally means evening song, so that's a pretty good parallel in itself. Written in 1855 at the age of 15 by Rheinberger, although he did revise it. And it's this beautiful setting for 6 parts, 6 voices, and the words mean, "Stay with us, for evening is approaching and the day has reached its end." And that, if it's a dark Tuesday afternoon, bit wet and rainy outside, and you're cramped into a candlelit chapel or church, this music, despite being from a German tradition of completely different style of singing and of choral music, still is very much in the spirit of Evensong. So I think this might be an interesting angle to approach the very English sounding service of Evensong, imagining it by drawing music from various different traditions that either use the correct texts or work in the same spirit to create a much more international piece of music that still is the perfect way to wind down the day. So I hope you enjoy these various pieces of music, and do write to me with your feedback and let me know how you're doing. I'll put an email address in the description below alongside the videos. Thank you very much for joining.